And perhaps if you can't answer them all now, plan to come back so that you can do it, because we do have a responsibility for communities and we do intend to fulfill it. So with that being said, I would ask you, the members of the Region 1, would you like to make I know you're not going to make a formal presentation, you made that clear. Would you like to make a little bit of a statement about what you foresee as being the most likely options for transportation of this material, or would you like us to start by asking you some questions with respect to what we already know has been presented?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us. I know this is it's a huge project. There's a lot of information, and a lot of it's new, and a lot of it goes back now over 25 years. So there's a lot of history there, which, like you said, I will not go over. But I would just like to first of all introduce our team. And for those who don't know me, my name is Dean Taliaferro, and we are the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. That was one question already, not the state. State is called Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and oftentimes it gets interchanged. So we're the federal EPA. We're the lead regulatory agency on this, so we are the decision maker, not DEP. They have review and consult and provide advice, but the decision maker on what direction to give to GE comes from EPA. That's the way the federal consent decree was set up. So with me is Chris Smith, who's one of our project managers. We actually have 5 other project managers. Chris has been on the project for about 7 years. Right now, he's working on a lot of aspects of the site, but primarily the Pittsfield reach. And if I use different terms, feel free to correct me. Sometimes it's called Reach 5A, but it's basically 5 miles of river sediment on floodplain and backwaters and vernal pools, all in Pittsfield. Happens to just line up that when it goes to the next reach, it's the Lenox town line. Alex Carly Dorsey is one of our newer project managers, has been on the team for about 2 years. He's going to help me out a lot on this transportation plan, taking the lead with coordinating comments and coordinating with the town managers. Ashlyn Brooks is our community involvement coordinator, primary point of contact for people with questions. You'll see a lot of emails from Ashlyn. We do talk all the time. We have our own internal meetings once a week. So hopefully nothing gets lost, but you know, she's very good and always at least gets the email around. It takes us sometimes a little while to get back to you, but we do have to circle back on certain things.
Dean, can I interrupt you?
Sure, anytime.
And I want to apologize to the members of my board and to you for not introducing you in the first place like you're doing right now. So I'm going to interrupt the advantage now just a little bit to introduce the members of my board. And we have right next to Ashlyn, we have Dr. Robert Westweiser, who's the chair of the Lee Board of Health, and Joanne Williams, also from the Lee Board of Health. We have Diane Romeo from Lenox, who's the chair of the Lenox Board of Health. Dr. John Kearns, who is also on the Lenox Board of Health. Dr. Elias Lepperman, who's with me on the Stockbridge Board of Health. Jim Willis, you know, is the director, and Zachary Roberts is also in the Tri-Town Health Department. So please forgive me for interrupting.
We have Dr. Noel Blagg as well on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Somewhere.
I didn't see him there.
I think we also have some people dialing in or listening in if they could make the connection, but I think we've got plenty here. So we do have John Kilborn, who's our attorney, Amy Laughlin, and I think Joanne, who's our press person, if they could have made it, are signed in. So I don't want to ignore them, but I don't always want to, you know, go back and forth on Zoom. I think this will be fine right here. So I just want to do a hopefully very short background of where we're at, you know, how comments are provided, whose plan this is. So in summary, I think most of us know, but there's always new people. EPA issued what's called a final permit for the Housatonic Rest of the River. It's sort of an odd name, but it's actually the remedy. It's the remedy that EPA selected. It went through a permit process. The permit was appealed by 2 entities. First to EPA's internal quasi-judicial, I guess is the word, Environmental Appeals Board. that upheld EPA's remedy. Then it was appealed to federal appeals court and they upheld EPA's remedy. So all the appeals are over, so the permit is final, or the remedy is final, whatever phrase you're more comfortable with, and we're now in the remedy implementation phase. So the permit, you know, it is what it is.
Okay.
Okay, so the permit requires GE, I'll leave it at that. The permit requires GE to evaluate rail, hydraulic, conveyance, trucking, or a combination of all those methods. Now, all those methods have advantages and drawbacks. EPA's plan, so first of all, this is GE's proposal. This is not EPA's proposal. GE's proposal, I got it at the same time you got it yesterday at 5 o'clock. So I've done a cursory review. But as far as what, if people ask me what is EPA's plan, like, we don't have one yet. We got it yesterday. So what we what we can talk about is how the community, how the Tri-Town Board of Health and municipalities can weigh in. So we have, similar to other documents, a 90-day public input period. So during that time, and I think the deadline, we've got some emails out today, and if everybody can get them, Ashlyn can get your email. So the public, an entity, the Board of Health can provide written input to EPA within that 90-day time period, because we know this is an important document. During that time period, you know, we're going to do our own evaluation, I guess concurrent. And then when we complete our review and then when we get all the comments, most of them will come in, you know, fine, near the end of the input period. We will review all those comments, all the suggestions, combine it with our own internal review and make what we think is the appropriate decision. We may have back and forth discussions with some town managers, but then EPA will issue its decision to GE. This is standard for all the documents, by the way, so it's not just this one. And the decision, when EPA issues the decision, it will either approve the document as is, which is unlikely, to be honest, for this one, with no changes, or it can approve it with conditions, which essentially says you need to address or modify these X number of conditions and resubmit it, or a total resubmit, which is essentially the same as approved with conditions. So we'll more than likely need to be a revised submittal. And then GE have to follow that direction. So just a little context on timing and where we're at. Well, when is transportation going to start, or when is the first use of trucks, trains, or hydraulic pump? So with regard to where we're at in schedule, the landfill or the UDF construction, that has to be constructed first before there's any remediation in the river. Otherwise, there's no place to bring the material. So the earliest start for that would be September or late fall in 2024. So the remediation, where you're starting to generate material from the Pittsfield stretch, may start as, you know, late 2025 or early 2026. So we're still 2 years away from any transportation of soil or sediment. So it's just a little time frame about why I think we have time for the 90 days and why this may be an iterative process. A lot of these documents are iterative. Don't want to lock in certain things that are going to happen 15 years down the road. So that's just another normal procedure in these long-term cleanups. And then a little more background, I think I put in an email, but I know everybody didn't get it. For the next 10 years, once the remediation starts in 2025, all of the remediation, all of the excavation or dredging will be upstream of Woods Pond. So there's 10.5 miles from start of this project, which is the confluence of the east and west branches in Pittsfield, down to the Woods Pond Dam. So that's 10.5 miles in a very wide floodplain. So that is going to bring you to about 2035. So just to give everybody some context, and it goes into why when I evaluate or when we evaluate and we get back to GE is how are you going to transport material from Rising Pond? Well, that's, you know, 15 years down the road from now. I don't think we need, my opinion, we may not need to lock everything in right now. My focus is going to be on the whole thing, but obviously the sooner work is the more important work. to know what the paths are. Now, some of it may have consequences that affect the whole project, so we gotta keep that in mind too, because they are related. But that's the overall timeline. It's a very long project. It's 13 years estimate, just an estimate. I can't tell you, sometimes they go faster or slower. But what was in the proposed plan and in the remedy selection was 13 years after GE initiates the first dredging. Like I said, it's still 2 years off, so it's a very long project. That's about all I have. So I'm not gonna have a lot of answers as to why aren't you gonna pick rail? Because we're not there yet, we wanna get the input. So I will try to answer questions on process and stuff that was done in the past, and maybe some highlights in this plan if asked. The other assistance or the other resources available to the municipalities. EPA is providing a contractor called Skeel, which we have provided in the past for assistance with the municipalities to review GE submittals. They provide it. They work directly with Chris Britton and Lee, the municipalities, the city of Pittsfield. They provide their comments directly to them. They can have some back and forth. The resource, they seem to be well appreciated. So I know a lot of this is very dense and it can be very technical. So that's one resource. I know the town of Lenox has hired Weston and Sampson to do their own, I assume, independent review of this plan. So that's an excellent resource. They're a very good contractor. And obviously, I'm sure they'll be asked a lot of questions to give their professional opinion. Lee, although I'm not sure if they've hired anyone yet, they were considering it, but that's obviously up to Lee. They don't have to hire a contractor, but there's other resources, I guess, there's a lot for people, because there's a lot here. Certainly, every individual board is not expected to have the expertise in all this happens. So that's all I have to say, and I'll, whatever we can do to provide info. Oh, and there's a EE is going to present on November, 28th. 28th, they're gonna come in person at the Lee Middle High School to give their presentation of, again, GE's plan. So it's well within the public input period. You can ask them questions about why they wrote this instead of asking me why GE wrote certain things. So that's all I have. So I guess I'll leave it up to you if you have any questions or how you want to proceed.
Well, thank you, Dean. So I'd like then to turn it over to the board and ask the board members to put forward any of the questions you might have at this point. Who would like to take the lead, Diane?
Sure. So I'm Diane O'Neill from Lenox. Not very knowledgeable, so when I tried to sit and read this, my background doesn't allow me to understand a lot of the technical, but I can see how detailed, how much time and effort has been put in. And looking back even to the beginning of 2000, there's a lot of time and effort. So thank you for everything you've done. My maybe question or maybe just concern, when I looked through, I was hoping that the transport wouldn't be on a lot of public roads. My concern is when I looked at all of the maps that Appendix A or the agenda, whatever it was, one of them going up 183 is going past 2 elementary schools into the center of Lenox, then onto Tanglewood, down to Route 7. Then none of them are going through the center of Lee. I really had hoped that GE would have tried to use rail as much as possible. With the understanding we all know, I know they said they wanted the flexibility to be able to move on their time scale. This is such a long project that I'm not so worried about the time frame as I'm really worried about the exposure to the people that live in all of our towns. Especially coming down Holmes and going out onto Route 7, the end of Holmes, we have a number of terrible accidents with just cars. Never mind putting, people run the red lights all the time, and there's terrible accidents there that I just worry that it may suit GE to be the easiest or the cheapest or the most flexible, whatever they want to say. But I worry about the health and safety of everybody that lives around the surrounding areas. That's,
I definitely can appreciate
you
that.
know,
The only thing I'll say on rail without reading this, that I've done a lot of these projects. We did the Pittsfield stretch for 10 years and sat, well over 100,000 yards out of state cubic yards. I think it was 150,000 cubic yards, another 200,000 within state. And I'm not speaking for GE or their plan. It was all done by trucks. It definitely can be done safely. The big challenge with rail is you need a rail siding of sufficient size with sufficient tracks to load it. So if you think of Pittsfield, and again, nothing's on the table, or I haven't even read the report. I read a couple tables. If you think of the Pittsfield area, you got 5 miles in Pittsfield. The tracks do go through it. Okay, if you want to build a rail siding, say to move it, we'll just say from point A to B, we don't even know where B is. You've got to pick one point in Pittsfield, and then every truck has to bring that material to that point. So you're not getting out of trucks by using rail.
you're just getting out of distance. Maybe.
You might, or you might have more distance in certain cases in smaller roads.
But it's still less exposure, I'm sorry, it's still less exposure.
Well, you might actually have more truck miles.
Okay.
For example, if you built one, if you look back to 2016 permit, EPA's proposed plan where everything was offsite, we envisioned one location for a rail facility and everything would go offsite potentially, and that would have been near Woods Pond. So everything generated in Pittsfield would have had to go to that one point. Everything generated in Great Bay didn't have to go to that point. And that's 100% rail,
But it's still.
100% trucks.
Okay.
So that's just one point. And then the other, if you look at the Pittsfield stretch, GE, one of the figures 3-1 that I looked at, I know there's a lot of concern. Pittsfield's not here and it's nothing against them, they're just not here. But the 5A stretch, the Pittsfield stretch, 4 years of construction, all of that material that GE proposed, at least in this figure, and then of course they said, well, subject to our next plan, which, whatever. That's GE's mode. The most of it in Lenox is the Holmes Road stretch, and then New Lenox Road, and then everything down Roaring Brook Road. So there's nothing going through Lenox Dale at all.
Yeah.
For the first 5 miles.
Commercial part of Lenox.
So I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's what's in there. And then what they proposed for out of state was either a rail facility at the Industrial Ave, which already exists on Route 20, but it looks like they leaned more towards using trucks going out 20 west. Again, through Pittsfield. So if you're just looking at that first 5 miles.
Nothing
that's
on
the
Walker Street?
Not in GE's plan, that's correct for Pittsfield.
I'd like the people in the audience, please, we will give you an opportunity to speak later, but for the moment, while we're discussing this will be a conversation between the invited guests from the EPA and our board members. So I would ask you to please give us the courtesy of waiting until we give you the opportunity to speak later and ask questions. Thank you.
So there might be some confusion. What was bargained for in the settlement agreement was for GE before they submitted this transportation plan was to get some input from the municipality. So they did do a presentation in Lee and did put out some figures. And that did have Walker Street. That has not, so those previous figures that were put out a month and a half ago were preliminary and based on feedback, this is their current proposal. So yes, their current proposal for reach 5A, I'm not saying the other reaches which you mentioned, I'm sure those maps that you mentioned are accurate for how to get from Great Barrington to Pittsfield. But for the Pittsfield stretch, no, it is not Walker Street. And then as the others, like you said, they do have those roads. So with rail, the other big challenge with rail, the UDF's on the east side of the river, the rail's on the west side of the river. I know there's a proposal from Housatonic Railroad that GE summarized where I think they had to do a very narrow, sharp turn under a bridge and I think close one of the roads, but I'd have to read that again. if you built the rail facility at just west of Woods Pond, and even if you could get it from Pittsfield there, you still gotta take it out of the truck, go over Mill Street and up to the UDI. Now, Great Barrington, maybe there's an option there to go by rail from Great Barrington to Lee, but again, you have to have a place to offload it. Where are you gonna offload it? If you offload it at Columbia Mill, then you gotta get everything from Columbia Mill to the UDI. Maybe that's a good option, maybe it's not, but like I said, everything has a plus and a minus.
Bob?
I have several areas of concern, but three for now. One is that the overarching element has got to be, to some extent, includes money, right? And how much can the entities get GE to spend, or some version of that?
Mhm.
You mentioned that trucking, maybe even more trucking, or at least the same, and it's mentioned just briefly in the document supplied yesterday. May be required, trucking may be required in the railroad or in that option, because you're still gonna have to drive to the onloading, offloading units. But if there were a lot of those spots, right, not just one, but one near every, figured out, it would be expensive to build those. My point would be, kind of from our standpoint, tough.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
the issue becomes then, is there a ceiling of expense built into this? Given all of these unknown factors, the length of time, inflation, various equipment and fuel, and all of those variables already are putting a huge uncertainty as to the final dollar figure.
Mhm.
I mean, from our perspective, if more sidings or onload, offload, railroad interfaces would make for fewer truck trips, fewer, lifestyle affecting aspects of, tens of thousands of tractor trailers on our streets, and then build them.
Yeah.
Then we would need you to advocate for the most of those onload, offload sites as possible, given the uncertainty of the bill anyway. So if it's expensive, tough. That's just, and that's not, that needs to be our collective thought. We didn't put the stuff there. We don't want it there. We're already making huge emotional, financial, fear-based, sometimes and reality-based concerns. So in that kind of huge ocean of discontent, we need advocacy toward things like more spots on the railroad than less, before just dismissing railroad as a possibility. It's left open in their document from yesterday, but with the vagueness of language that actually doesn't even improve upon our knowledge, to my extent, of the transportation plan. That's one, not really a question, I guess, but a comment and an ask. The ask is, given all the uncertainty as to the final dollar figure, minimizing the exposure and traffic and noise and diesel fumes and risks to the public, advocacy on that event, put a siding up or, an access point up every couple of miles, for every reach or whatever, even if it costs tens of millions of dollars, and I'm sure it would. But that's one comment. Another area that's been decided previously, I think, in Pittsfield's reaches, is certain roads have been excluded from being used. They've been, decided that no traffic would occur on those. There's a list of them in this current document, but it exists, that list exists from before. How does a town get their road on that
Mm,
list? Because that would be something that maybe several of us would be interested in. And I'm not sure about that.
Sure, I can give the history behind that and some potential outcomes. So that came up during settlement discussions, which I can't get into too much, but those are roads that lead to the river. And there was concern from the people, from the official representatives in that those would be primary access roads to get material out of the river. In Lee and Lenox, there's not very many neighborhoods where you would go through a neighborhood to get to the river. So that's why Pittsfield bargained for it. Lee, Lenox and all the other people had the opportunity to bargain for that and chose not to for whatever reason. Not for me to decide. So that was in the settlement agreement that was signed in 2020. I have talked to the town of Lee and Lenox. There are certain small roads, and again, these are not state highways, these are small residential roads. There's certain small residential roads where you don't want trucks to go down, let me know. And we've had that discussion, and GE early on was considering using some of the smaller roads south of Willow Hill Road in that neighborhood in Lee. I said, I'll do my best to make sure they're not on the plan. No, they're not on the plan. So if there's certain roads that you would prefer not to be used, you gotta let me know. You can put them in your comments. But I don't see a lot of small residential roads that I haven't read the plan that much, but most of it is, you've got to use the state highways, you've got to use major roads. There's small roads that are dead end roads that go nowhere. Those, if you look at the ones in Pittsfield, that's pretty much what they are. So yeah, if there's certain streets you don't want to use, you have acceptance of street A or street B. What I think we want to, but what I would like to avoid, but it's probably unavoidable, is it's already happening. Towns pitting themselves against each other. That's bad for everybody. You know, our neighborhoods pitting against each other. You don't go down my road, go down their road. Well, I'm gonna have to make a decision at the end.
Well, the part that's bad, if I'm still on the clock here, I haven't yielded my minutes yet. Is not towns pitting, going up against each other. It's the underlying problem that sets up controversy, competition, fear, and loathing of some of what's going to happen. It's those underlying elements. In order for the towns not to somehow have some friction when it comes to truck traffic, you'd have to undo that underlying stuff. So, but this meeting is not designed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I bring that up so that we don't characterize that friction as the town's fault, and that some enlightened behavior by members, by individual humans within the towns somehow can become enlightened and avoid some of that already complex, competitive, and very loathsome situation. So it's the underlying problem, not the behavior it develops. So I
didn't mean to apply
careful with
it
that.
to anybody's behavior, but to be honest, the settlement agreement was signed by the 5 towns.
We
We may
don't-
not like that or like that, but that's a fact.
Is it
So
your,
it needs to be implemented. So we need to all collectively figure out how to implement this in a sane and rational way.
Would anybody else have a question?
May I?
Go ahead, please.
As much as you can. What's the potential, if there is a problem, if there's an accident, a traffic accident, and stuff is spilled, has anybody done an impact study on what that would be like? What the contingencies are for cleaning it up, what the impact is on where it's spilled, and how one would mitigate that?
I think, as I've said many times, this is low-level PCBs and dirt. First thing I'd be worried about is the diesel and the oil, and then they get a shovel and scoop it up. This is stuff that's sitting in the floodplain right now that people are walking in. One truck accident it's not gonna be an acute hazard. It's no worse than any other hazardous material being driven down your road on a daily basis. In fact, it's probably the least hazardous thing you'll see on your road. Oh, no, there has not been an assessment, if you want my answer. The assessment for a risk assessment is repeated. Long-term thermal absorption and soil ingestion would lead to an potential increase in cancer. So one-time exposure to soil that you're not ingesting or rubbing all over your skin is not gonna lead to a significant, is not gonna lead to a health.
And yeah, I think it's an emotional thing where if there's a spill, people will be thinking, what's been released, particulates and fumes, whatever.
Well, I just wanna say, it's
You're
there
saying-
now, so I wish people had the same amount of concern about what in the floodplain that people are walking over than worrying about a truck accident. But that's my view.
Right, but the truck accident would be right there, and I think.
Yeah, it'll get cleaned up.
GE will have a contingency.
They will have a contingency plan, but as far as, order of magnitude of these, we're on long-term acute, long-term chronic issues, not short-term acute exposure issues.
The other thing is, I was reading this as well as I could understand it myself. It had people overseeing the process. GE's plan, they're talking about their contractors oversee all this. Is anybody not paid by GE overseeing it?
Yeah, EPA, that's our job to oversee. We have
You do directly
contractors
oversee
on
it.
site. We have a contractor on site watching them every time they collect a sample. We'll have them watch it. Town of Lenox, town of Lee, if they run it, like they have Weston and Sampson, they may have an on-site rep. That's up to the towns to decide what to do with that 55 million, how much money they want to put into oversight. They have no problem working with the towns collectively or individually with supplementing or watching our oversight or what, should be coordinated or watching GE directly. But no, GE probably wouldn't speak about EPA because again, it's GE's plan, it's not EPA's plan.
Right.
Any other questions? Well, I have something to say. I'd like to build on something that Bob Westpfizer already said, actually 2 points. And in order to do that, you're gonna have to, I would like to just briefly review my understanding of the history of the transportation options and how we got to the options that we are facing potentially in the next few months. I understand that the region started to work on considering the rest of the river project in about 2010 or something like that. And that the initial transportation disposition options, I'm not talking about the floodplain sediment options, the SED9, flood FP4 with modifications that you decided on in terms of that excavation and stuff. I'm talking about the actual transportation, the treatment disposition options. You had, first of all, the TD1, as I remember it was called, which basically, and just to make a point, the 5 treatment disposition options you had initially considered all involved primary consideration of a dichotomy, which was basically whether or not the PCB concentration in the waste material was going to be more than 50 milligrams per kilogram or not. And the reason for that was because of the Toxic Substance Control Act's limitations on the low side that you could ultimately bring these things to, required a differentiation of the PCB concentrations, and therefore that then directed you to decide where to put it. TSCA approved site, which I understand we don't have in Berkshire County, and therefore this had to be considered to be either in New York State or Michigan or someplace like that. And your first option then, TD1, as you called it, involved transportation only by trucks. And the transportation of this higher level concentration, the TSCA, to a TSCA approved site would be by truck. And the transportation of the lower concentration material would also be by truck, but it would also be off-site. Now I'm using the RCRA definition of of on-site, the opposite of that, meaning it's not contiguous with wherever you're taking the stuff from. It has to do with contiguity, I understand. But you were gonna transport everything out with truck, and it would all be out of the county. Then there was TD2, which was a siting of a receptive site that might be in a kind of a water or pond or something area locally for the lower concentration substances. I understand that the higher concentration substances in TD2 were still going to go off-site to a TISCA approved site, but for I think reasons of capacity limitation or possibly groundwater or some other reason, you decided ultimately TD2 was not a very preferred option. Then you had TD3, which was again, it was a truck option. In this case, the trucks were going to take the material that was of the higher concentration PCBs to a TISCA approved offsite location. And the lower concentration was going to come to a local UDF. That's the TD3. And then you had TD4 and TD5, which were chemical extraction and thermally treated stuff, which ultimately were not preferred options either. As a result of input from the Commonwealth and from the state of Connecticut, I think in 2011, or maybe late 2010, the EPA Region 1 decided to modify TD1 to something they called TD1RR, which was the transportation of the higher concentrated PCBs to an off-site TISCA approved site by rail, and a transportation of the lower concentration PCBs to a non-TISCA approved site, also by rail. And this ultimately became the preferred choice for EPA Region 1. Now, in the meantime, you had in 2012 a comparative analysis of these different options. That is the transportation by truck of the high concentration PCBs offsite, the transportation by truck of the low concentration PCBs offsite, the transportation by rail of the PCBs of high concentration offsite, the transportation by rail of the low concentration PCBs offsite, and the transportation by truck of the low concentration PCBs on site. And you had a very thorough comparative analysis that looked at cost, it looked at miles traveled, it looked at injury rates, it looked at greenhouse gases. It was a phenomenally educational comparative analysis, in my opinion, when I reviewed it. I see that you revisited that analysis in 2014 and upgraded it a bit, but you still continue to prefer the TD1RR option. And I thought the second comparative analysis that you did, I think with the Army Corps of Engineers assistance, was also extremely educational. I reviewed a lot of public comments related to it. I see that the EPA relied heavily on this very, very thorough analysis, and I really appreciated reading it myself. I have to say, though, at this point, and then I know in 2016, you actually came out with a permit based on these comparative analyses that basically put forward the TD1RR as a preferred EPA option. And as much as I appreciated seeing these very complicated analyses, and I thought they were very thorough, I never once in all of my review, and I know it's an immense record and I may have missed this, and I'd be very happy to be informed by you and pointed to this, I never saw an analysis of the transportation of the lower concentration PCBs by rail to a local UDF. Now that omission, in my mind, it becomes extremely contrasting to the educational and public opportunity offering analyses that you did in 2012 and 2014 with respect to each one of these other transportation options, but never regarding the use of rail to a local UDF. I've never seen that. In fact, the only time I saw EPA even initiate a comment about the analysis of local sited transportation by rail of the low concentration PCBs was in October of 2016 as a response to a public comment. It's on page 366. And I'm going to quote. And now I think this is, I think there was something, I think this is the reason why we've had an inadequate discussion of the local transportation of rail. I think this is why Dr. Westpfeiser's point about looking at the different siding and involving the community more is absolutely indicated in this regard. Because in October of 2016, EPA said alternatives TD2 and TD3 do not require off-site disposal. Therefore, there was no need to discuss transport by rail. Now, I think that was because you favored TD1RR so much that you didn't really think it was necessary to look at transportation. I'm just guessing, I'm sorry. And the subsequent analyses never involve local transport, the transport by rail of the low concentration PCBs to a local rail site. So Dr. Westpfeiser's point about considering multiple rail sidings, the Housatonic Railroad's comments that it brought forward in 2020, where they definitely disagreed with the GE analysis. Your own analysis, where GE claims that the siding capital costs are going to be $30 million, and you quoted 300,000. I want you to understand something. I gave you these petitions. These petitions are signed. I know a lot of these people. Now, these people are saying you did not discuss the local transport, the transport by rail of the low concentration PCBs to our local dump. And they're very responsible people. These 1,200 plus signatures are from people, many that I know I would trust their judgment. The reason they're saying you didn't discuss it is because you did not. And so what I would ask you here, and I hope you understand this, because I really want the EPA to lead Berkshire County, leaving behind a legacy that we can all be proud of, and especially that is befitting all the work you've done. There are many, many potential benefits to using the rail over the trucks. We won't have the nuisances going through town. We won't have the competitiveness. We won't have any of those things, but we also have, there's the possibility of using these sidings, and I got this from the Housatonic Railroad Company, using these sidings for future use of the rail, possibly for commuters or for passengers. I'm not a railroad expert, but this has not been studied. And I would ask you to please understand that these people that signed the signature are legitimate, concerned people, and they want really just simply to let you know that you have not considered that transportation means at all. I'm sorry. I know you've sent me some stuff, Ashlyn. I looked at it. I know Mr. Kilburn gave me some information, but it only relates to, and I'll have to tell you, this is another idea that there are many ideas that go along with this, but repeatedly, for example, in the 2016 final permit, you have a passenger where the permittee should consider measures to maximize the use of rail for offsite. Now, in the 2016 permit, the idea of offsite meant everything. But when we got to the 2020 permit, that idea of everything no longer obtained because the other stuff was going to the local site. The same wording embodied a different meaning in the context, and it was never, when you look at the rough draft of the 2020 permit, you have all this red line stuff, and I know you have your statement of basis, but never was that crucial change in the contextual meaning of that statement brought out. And so therefore, you did not have any comments during 2020 like you have on those petitions where you have all these people. The reason these people are on this petition is because, and I know you're trying to do a good job, I understand that, okay? I think really that you favored TD1RR so much that you didn't do this, but you didn't. So please do it.
A couple things, you had your history mostly right, however, one key thing was on TD3. Which was evaluated for both GE, did the corrective measure study, was everything on site, everything in a UDF regardless of concentration. Our choices at the time were to evaluate everything on site. TD2, like you said, was a confined disposal facility with limited capacity, so depending on the volume of the remedy, the access would have to go off site. So you're correct on 2, 4, and 5. GE's evaluation of TD1, they proposed the CMS will invite all trucks off-site, correct. EPA made GE modify that to look at railroad off-site. So that was our modification. The final permit, like you said, it did not require GE to use railroad. It was a preference for rail or maximize rail, whatever words you use, I'm sure are correct. It's the identical language that's in the 2020 permit, word for word for off-site. But for offsite, it's word for word the same.
Yeah, no, I understand. The
So
reason
for
I'm saying that
onsite-
it's a different meaning is because the
I
context.
understand, so that covers the offsite. Secondly, EPA has not made a decision on the use of rail one way or another. We just got the plan yesterday. So to say that we're against rail, I mean, I think there is a practical limitation. I think in Pittsfield, there's not a great spot for a
I'm
rail
not,
facility.
Dean, I'm not saying you're against rail. What I'm saying is that you did such a good job with your comparative analyses of all of those other options. And you omitted the key option that we're talking about. And
Correct.
all I would ask you to do is to put the same effort into.
We will, and we will, and
Okay,
for your
please,
time,
that's all.
I'm just saying, I think the only thing I will say, I think there's a practical limitation on the number of sites. Pittsfield, there's no obvious spot where you're gonna put it that's gonna reduce truck traffic by any significant amount. There's no existing rail system that would, I think, end up in less truck traffic. So I guess I just asked you to read the plan. If you've got a great idea like in Stockbridge next to Glendale Dam, I don't know, if somebody's got, I haven't looked at their plan, maybe the Tonic Railroad had a great spot. But I don't know where you build a rail spur next to Glendale Dam.
Well, one
So
other thing.
I guess if you got these suggestions and if the Tonic Railroad wants to offer, if they've got a place with ownership, as you said, you need ownership, you need land. And those are two things you need. I'm not shilling for GE. I don't care how much they spend, but you have to have something that's logical. You can't just say, make them spend $1 gazillion just because.
I'm not.
It's also gotta work.
I want to speak to that too. It's that I believe that you may not really understand how much the state might be interested in helping us out with
Well,
this.
if the state has contribute funds, I think that would be great.
Well, the state has already invested in the railroad. and
I
this would help that
understand,
investment,
so
right?
if they're interested in building the spurs, I mean, hey, I'm all in on that, but I'm just saying, you need land, you need ownership. You need space, and I'm not gonna go into G's cost estimate, I don't really care, but it needs to also work, it needs to be logical. So if you have suggestions
If
for.
it's better to have the trucks, if it turns out to be better to have the trucks, I'll support it. Okay, but I want you to understand that I valued your comparative analyses of all those other options so much that it's absolutely, you need to do this with this remaining option.
Understood, I got it, but if you have specific locations, that's great too, because it's also gotta come together and work, and you gotta, I would just ask you to think about, you've gotta get the material to each one of those staging areas. Personally, if you're gonna ask me, are there gonna be 15 rail sidings? I don't think so.
But when,
I'll take a high end so that I don't get into the middle ring, but.
I mean, it sounds like you're putting it on us to
I'm
find.
not saying this is public input period, we will look at it, but the whole thing is like, how can you have input? Well, if you've got it, let us know, we'll obviously look at it.
We
I got it yesterday.
understand the practical and physics
And
type
also,
orientation,
also you have.
the ownership, et cetera, but it sounds to me like you're dismissing that possibility by bringing up those characteristics, and I would, and then asking us to look into it by asking the question, if you folks have some ideas about this, come back, that no one at this table has the skill, the aptitude, the time, or the job of doing that. Now, if you're saying the town of Lee, and then maybe separately, the town of Lenox, and the needs to hire a company or somebody a consulting firm to look into that possibility, maybe that's what we need to do. I don't think that that's, that's not either. That's something that GE should be doing.
GE did it, so we're just
They
talking
didn't do
about.
it. We don't know that they did that
Let me
yet.
step back. GE did a plan. The question was, how do you have input? There's various ways to have input. We have a 90-day input period.
Okay,
So
so
Lennox has hired a consultant,
right, but not to specifically look for access to the railroad.
but
I'm not,
it's to review all submittals, but I'll leave that up to Chris.
Okay,
Ketchum.
well, I
So,
think-
I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, we'll look at it, but part of this is how can you get input? You could just say, and my only concern is people think the rail's a panacea. Well, the rail goes by, so you'll just roll up there with your front end loader while the train's going by and dump it in. It doesn't work that way. You need rail siding. I haven't evaluated. these.
I'm,
So if somebody has great ideas, we'll take them. We haven't made a decision.
I
I'm
would,
just trying to, no, I'm not gonna promise something that's not gonna happen.
right, but
There's
it's
not
not
gonna
a
be 15
panacea.
rail sidings.
No one, I think, believes it's a panacea. It's an attractive
Sorry, we
option
don't
to
have
those of
any
us
questions
who
yet.
are on the streets.
Understood.
And with that in mind, an automatically dismissive nature is not going to be, is only going to make this already polarized situation and the participants in that situation, it's only going to make them more interested in it. But the concrete point is, we aren't equipped, we're not, we don't have the tools to do this inquiry of site ownership, logistics, engineering ourselves. We need expertise to do that, and we need the resources to get that expertise. Are you saying that?
I would say you have
How
the
do we go
resources.
about-
You
What's
got-
your recommendation
I,
to thoroughly look into this aspect? What would you recommend?
you can do whatever you want with your resources. The South County Town got $55 million that'll come through sometime this month. You can use it or not use it. That's an option. You can use Skio. They're not gonna be at that precise level. You could just rely on, hey, I want you to use rail, do your best. We think everything should be rail. We can take that input. It's up to you how to give us input. I'm just telling you how to get it, and we will do it all independently. And we haven't dismissed anything. I don't want to be dismissive, but I also don't want to mislead people.
No, you're not.
Walking out of this meeting, that because everybody wants rail, it's gonna be rail. Well, that's all.
So you're suggesting that we take some of that 55 million, investigate the possibility of multiple sidings, and then we go to GE and say, look what we found out, please do
I'm
this?
saying Chris Britt, whoever's running that contract for the town of Lenox, can direct whatever they want at any level they want.
Mhm.
And provide EPA comments. We will sit down and meet with Chris Britton and his consultant anytime they want.
Okay,
We don't want to control how he spends the money, how we, whoever's in charge,
right.
spends the money as little or as much as they want on rail. Maybe they want to save it for an oversight person during construction. That's totally up to Lennox.
I'm just
We'll
trying
work
to
with whatever we
understand.
have.
I'm trying to understand the concrete steps. So we use you're saying we can do whatever we want with that 55 million, right? That's
Your money.
good. So we take some of that 55 million and you're suggesting we get an engineering or a consulting firm to look into the possibility of more rail sidings. We find that information out and say there's room for 5. Forget about Pittsfield. You've already, sounds like you've analyzed that area. But say we find room for multiple sidings in these other regions, 5B through 7.
Yeah, got it.
And for both low level, in county dumping
Yep.
and stuff that's going out. What do we do with that information
You give it to us in the input period.
in that 90 days?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or we move along, the other option here, which I'm looking at is, like I said, for things in Great Barrington, that's not happening for 10 years. This could be an iterative
Right,
plan. I
that's a
could
good point.
conditionally approve it with the Pittsfield routes.
That's a good.
That's one option.
Yeah.
And here's one scenario, way ahead of the game. Plan is perfect for Pittsfield. you need to do X, Y, Z for everything else, GE. It's a little more time.
So I
But in
think,
the interim, we're willing to work with any of the town officials. So no, it doesn't all have to be done in the 90 days. We do have to, we would like to respond to this within the 90 days. And that can be, I'm sure at some point you need to further evaluate X, Y, Z. It doesn't mean you have to have every answer, but a lot of these plans, I know, especially they are iterative. They build on each other.
I'm
And you
trying
keep
to
going
get,
for it.
I'm trying to get to a point, a behavior and action that we can accomplish that will at least be the appropriate next step toward thoroughly looking at this toward yes or no. And right now, it's all, what it's kind of, oh, well, there's probably no spots, or it's gonna
Here's
be,
my
I don't wanna do that. And so, and we're not gonna get this, any study like this done in 90 days, obviously. But we need your help and or just write it down now. We're asking for, we can have our town representatives ask for or demand or strongly recommend, whatever our verb is, to advocate for a thorough, concrete, paying homage to the excellent studies and analyses done in the early 2010s and teens on that railroad question, the number of sidings, et cetera, with in mind to not eliminate, we know that, but to reduce truck traffic on our road. So we need that concrete action. I know we can do what we want with the 55 million. But it's like, we're a town volunteer board. We need your help
Here's my
to be
suggestion,
directed.
would be for all the board to work through your town manager and your board as well. That is one point of contact in your pool and your resources. Each
Good.
individual board doing their own thing. I gotta say that, you're welcome to, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Okay,
Conservation Commission could do the same, so now you got 5 boards going off trying to figure out where a rail sighting is at.
right.
Welcome to, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I would encourage you, for us, it's nice, one point of contact, Chris Brent, Chris Ketchum, talk to him a lot. Just feed everything to him, see what he says. I mean, he's your representative, he's the full-time person.
We'll accept like a different level of technical comments. I mean, your comment could be as simple as, we don't think the rail's been fully evaluated.
That's
one,
fine.
but let me just add to that. That's one comment. We'll consider that. We'll do our own review. Or your comment could be, we had a consultant look at this and here's a very detailed XYZ of how we think this is to be done.
Right.
So we'll consider both those comments. The more detailed ones are probably a little more useful to us in going back to GE to try to compel them to do more. But it's, so there, it's a gradient. It's not like it has to be everything or nothing,
That's a good point, and to the extent you say consolidate, to the extent the town of Lenox, the town of Lee, the town of Stockbridge gets all their comments from their various boards and does a consolidated comment letter, that to me would provide more weight. Then I don't get Concom says X, Board of Health says Y, agricultural says Z, and then the town manager says something else. So the more it's gradients, and all doesn't have to be done now, but I would really encourage using your town manager who's I don't know much about Stockbridge, they haven't been involved as much talking to us, but Chris Pitt and Chris Ketchum and those 2 boards of selectmen have been very involved. It's not just all on you, it's that,
Right.
that's, I guess, where I'm going, is like, whatever the town,
Okay,
and you represent the town, and as an individual, you can do what you want too, but as far as the town of Lenox, that would be, one way to look.
Dean, forgive me, I'm a little confused about something. I just want to make sure that I understand things as best as I can here. I know things are complex. In the initial stages of analyzing the rail options, to the offsite places in 2012 and 2014, GE had inputs, and there was a whole lot of information about the transportation, the greenhouse gases, the costs, the siding, the infrastructure costs. And after all of that analysis, I'm bringing this up now because you're just telling me something that's sort of surprising me, as though I should already know that the sidings aren't gonna work or anything like that. But after all of that analysis that the EPA went through in 2012 and 2014, it concluded that the rail was the best way to do it. Now, that was its preferred option. And at the end of the 2014 comparative analysis that really even went further into it, that was the EPA's preferred option. Now, I don't know what happened in the confidential mediation. Obviously, we're not allowed to know that. And I feel like a child, not capable of understanding things that were put in the hands of people who are going to direct my, future. But needless to say, it seems to me for some reason in those secret meetings, this whole analysis and conclusion system that had been put forward for several years, that was responsive to many hundreds of public comments related to all of that analysis, disappeared.
Yeah, well, let me say one thing on the 2016 permit. You're right, EPA did a preference for rail, but remember, and you mentioned it, 300,000 for one rail siding, one. So that meant every cubic yard of material dug up was gonna be put in a truck and driven to Woods Pond. We never looked at more, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, we're saying we did this extensive analysis. So if you went back to the 2016 permit and that was held, everything would go in a truck from the entire rest of the river to one location to be loaded on rail and sent out. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but that was the proposal. So there was never an evaluation, even when it was quote, all by rail, to not use trucks.
Well, the community has trade-offs. So if there were trucks going, but everything was being transported out of the county, I think the community might have had a different idea of whether or not the trucks are that bad.
Understood. I
Right.
understand that. I'm just saying, to say that we didn't look, why didn't we look at rail? Why did we? I'm just saying what we looked at was one rail.
But
You're right.
still,
We did not in 2020, when we did the revised plan. Probably, we did not look at a detailed analysis of additional rail spurs. It was to be determined later by the transportation plan, but you're right. There is no thorough analysis of trucks versus rail because that's what we're doing now.
well, thank you. Do any other members have questions?
Not on the way out. I'm sorry. This was just like overwhelming. Can you talk a little bit about the hydraulic pumping, or I don't understand that at all?
Okay, as best I can. So hydraulics, pumping and hydraulics dredging are two different things, first of all. So hydraulics just means usually you're moving solids to there in a liquid. Or 90% liquid, 10% solid.
Okay.
Just like a hose is hydraulic pumping. You put a pump, you pump it up. So when you transport sediment from a water body, you can hydraulically dredge it. We'll start with that. That's just like a giant vacuum cleaner. You put it on the bottom of the top of the sediment, bottom of the pond, and it sucks it up. So it's gonna be 95% water because that's how it's gonna move. Because you can't really pump 100% solid.
Okay.
So that is what it's meant by hydraulic pumping, and you can pump technically unlimited miles. It becomes impractical after a while. You need booster pumps and all that. So the settlement agreement and even the initial remedy contemplated, well, it's definitely a settlement agreement, was for Woods Pond. That material can be hydraulically pumped up to the upland disposal facility property.
Okay.
So none of that has to go into a truck. Now, let me qualify that before somebody says it. That's the material that's going to stay on site in the UDF. All of it can be pumped. The stuff that stays on site on the UDF then never has to touch a truck. It's hydraulically pumped, goes up there, it gets dried out, dewatered, many different ways, stays there. There will be, if there's a portion of Woods Pond sediment that doesn't meet the criteria for the UDF, the higher level, whatever phrase you want to use, that can also be hydraulically pumped, dewatered, to filter press, various options. Then it becomes a solid. Then you put it in a truck, intermodal car, which is another option that you may hear about later, but. And then it has to be transported out either rail or truck. So
You
that.
can only do a short distance with that.
Yeah, shorter is better, but you can go longer distances at some point, like from Great Barrington on up, probably impractical, because you have to have the pipeline somewhere. I mean, if it's natural gas, that's basically what it is. You just bury it everywhere, but I don't think that's gonna happen. You know, like, so for Woods Pond, I'm 100% sure they can hydraulically pump it, maybe 3 miles up from Woods Pond, they can hydraulically pump it. With some practical from Pittsfield, it's gonna be very hard.
Okay.
So that's, and then you might hear hydraulic, you can also do mechanical dredging, which is basically a bucket, clamshell bucket. You dig up the sediment, you put it on the dredge, then you actually add water and hydraulically pump it. So I just want, there's 2 different phrases, hydraulic dredging and hydraulic pumping. Hydraulic pumping is kind of the key, I would think, for you, because that's what keeps it off the road.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So, Mr. Chair, I do have a quick question for the boards. It's maybe an actionable thing, and Dr. Westpizer's point, it seems like we keep going in circles. Perhaps the board tonight should maybe think about making an actual motion in a vote to send a letter to all 3 town managers, chairs of the board of selectmen, really encouraging them to really take serious any resources made available to look at this possible study. Rather than have fragmented conversations with town managers, kind of off the side, I think there'll be a lot of weight and communication if this board decides on penning a formal request to all 3 towns, asking them to look into this possible study, whatever resources that they can find available. I don't think it's gonna happen in 90 days, but it's something is better than nothing. It seems like we keep going, we have all these different ideas and we keep going in circles, and now we gotta use our resources to hire another consultant that's gonna send a request to EPA for possible consideration, but it's not guaranteed. It's just an idea for the Tri-Town board.
It's a joy with Lenox is doing.
Well, we take a motion.
Yeah.
If there's a second and majority, that we craft one document addressed to all 3 towns, asking them to seriously consider whatever resources are made available, whether that's hire somebody so we can figure out this rail thing. Rather than having offshoot conversations during coffee hour, if something comes directly from this Tri-Town board, it carries more weight.
You're asking them to then.
Ask them to do something, I
Right,
don't know.
but then what he said is to ask for it to come from one entity of the board, of the selectmen. No, not from us, but from the selectmen or.
Just an idea, we've done that before, we send requests, asking for funding for the consultant, during the lead adjudicator hearing, but just an idea, it's something we need to, I would rather have something formal from the boards of health, rather than having a coffee hour with the town manager saying, hey, this is what happened at the Tri-Town meeting last night. Would you guys consider using resources for rail for a study? If it comes formally from the boards of health to the select boards, they'll take that more serious.
Would anybody like to make that motion?
I'm trying to think.
Or we read it. I mean, it's, you make a motion, my thought is you make a motion to authorize me on behalf of the boards to send a letter to all 3 town managers, imploring them to seriously consider any resources available to study rail option. Or something to that
And
degree.
also the hydraulic pumping, I mean, that sounded actually pretty good.
He said it can only go so far,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so the hydraulic, yeah.
So look into that option
Right.
too. I mean,
No,
there's
it's
less
been-
traffic.
The hydraulic pumping, I think I stand it, they proposed it, and I think it's just a question of how far upriver it goes. I think if you look at the tables, there's somewhere where there's 1 million cubic yards, whatever, plus or minus estimated, and when it goes into truck and rail, I think it's a much lower number, because the presumption is, there's a statement in there somewhere, is the difference, 300,000 cubic yards or whatever it is going to be hydraulically pumped. So yeah, you're more than welcome to look in and weigh in, and as far as Joanne, your comment, we're fine if the Tri-Town Board of Health wants to submit comments, but to me, It's kind of odd, like we're used to using with municipalities as the point of contact, someone speaks.
So I
for the
would
municipality.
submit to comments on behalf of the board, but the point I'm trying to
Yeah,
make
so I
is.
guess that's all I'm saying, we're used to, all right, Lee, what do you want? And by that means, whoever speaks for Lee speaks for Lee Municipal.
And the point I'm trying to make is when Diane and I were speaking, it's like, let a board call, have a meeting and give us some recommendations on the study that came out late last night. So we should do it as a tri-town board, as a unified front that's consistent. Because we don't know who Lee is hiring, we don't know if anyone in Stockbridge is hiring anybody, but it needs to be taken serious.
Just one that came from each town manager or all three town managers together to a comment would be better.
Jim, I know this isn't time for us to comment, but I just want to say, I think that's a great suggestion because we've been challenged.
I'm
by-
sorry, I appreciate it. If I let one person stand up, I have to let everybody stand up.
Well, like, give
I-
the Lennox voters
Please,
something
I
to go to.
appreciate your
one side
input.
with.
Please, I'm sorry. It'll be in a few minutes and you'll be able to say it.
It's a great idea.
Is there value in allowing some time to digest this transportation plan?
Yes,
that was just
absolutely.
Before, because there might be other aspects and, I mean, we can send 2 letters or 3 letters, but I would suggest that it's premature to do that. I'm advocate for the point, but I want it to be complete.
We're gonna meet again in December for our budget,
Yeah.
which is like early December, so that gives us about a month to digest this.
Yeah.
Maybe we can bring it up again and then have more clarity. But then we'll be 30 days off the public comment period.
Yeah, but
No, that's-
Does anybody else have anything to say about that? Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions right now like that, we will be having a public comment period. You're invited to stay if you wish. Generally, during public comment, we listen to what people tell us, but we don't go back and forth with discussions because our agenda is constrained to certain topics and we like to stay on point. So if you'd like to stay for the public comment, you're very welcome to do it. I'm going to open it up very soon. If you'd like to take get some coffee while we start to do this, that's fine, or however you'd like to do it. If you want to beat it out of here, I wouldn't hold that against you.
No, we're fine listening to the public comment.
Well, thank you
But
very
like I
much.
said,
Thank
we
you very
can't- We're not gonna evaluate the plan, that's all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to open up the period of public comment now, and we'll also be paying attention to people on the tube. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn this over to Jim to do that, because he's better at it than I am, but I would like you to limit your speaking to 2 minutes, please, until we have given everybody a chance to talk. So Jim, you wanna do it?
Just, if you can say your name and address for the record.
My name is Cindy Mathias from Lee. I have a few points to make. I'll start with the last one. So, as you stated, there's $55 million that the town was given as a guide, not to be used by the towns to fight GE and EPA, but that was their payoff. So in case there's gonna be lawsuits against the towns for loss of property and loss of business and getting cancer, that's what the money's supposed to be used for, not to hire the Army Corps of Engineers, which the EPA needs to do. They're the ones who have to fight for GE, not the towns. Another thing I would like to say is that you say they can't be building these platforms for the trains because they're too expensive or where to put them. Well, where are you putting the dewatering plants? The areas that you're gonna have to dewater all the stuff in the trucks. That's gonna be in the same places. And who are you having to clean those tires and the trucks that are gonna leak? The tires are gonna be dragging those PCBs from mud all through the towns and all through the streets. Who's taking care of that? You know, you also said, Dean said, in 2020 decree, you know, they signed off on that. So those people, the BRPC and the 5 towns signed off on it. They signed that in secret. A handful of people signed the decree in secret that was never brought to the towns. We never had a say. That is so unfair. So, you know, the last statement was the first one where Dean said, oh, you know, we're not going to talk about Rising Pond because that's in years down the road. years down the road. We don't need a plan now. You need a plan for everything you're putting forth because we are living here and it's our businesses, our livelihoods, our health that are at risk. You need that plan, a full 13 years of a plan.
Ann, go ahead.
Hi, Ann Lang, Sullivan Lane. One of my first comments would be that, Dean earlier, suggested that the towns come together and work together. And that's a really sweet and nice idea for that to happen. And I'm wondering where your thought was when the entire plan was being made and the EPA allowed, you guys, the EPA, allowed GE to divide and conquer all the towns in secret meetings individually, when it should have been held together as Reston River as a group. It should have never been split apart.
Yeah.
Same thing to say. I know you two asked me to. My wonderful thank you to everybody who showed up, listening to your constituents and, really advocating for us in our health. I appreciate it. I apologize for my outburst of yelling out the word Walker Street earlier. It's difficult to sit here. I've only been doing this for 4 years. There have been so many people who've been doing it for decades. Many of us are very new to this. And I would really like to say, please reconsider about that proposal that Jim just made earlier. Could you take a minute to just repeat what you were suggesting to all refresh our memory that you said about having a vote now? So we don't throw away 30 days.
Well, let's get through public comment and before we'll close that and we'll go back.
Thank you.
Ann?
Hi, Marie Field, I'm from Lenox, Mass. I think everybody sitting in this room really, has the same mission statement as the EPA, and it's all about environmental protection, health and safety for the residents of Berkshire County. There's no two ways about it. Dean, I was listening to you and you were talking about the contaminated soil and you were talking about, rubbing it all over your skin or percutaneous exposure and ingestion as definitely risk. But one of the things I didn't hear, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is the aerosolization of the PCBs. I think that's my concern when I think about seeing, I live on Housatonic Street, I see dump trucks going up and down Housatonic Street all the time. And they have sort of like a tarp that barely covers the gravel that they're hauling down towards the gravel pit. And all I could think about when I see those dump trucks go by is on some windy day, that could be spewing PCBs in the air too. And that to me puts a lot of children at risk. And that's what scares me because I was a young nurse in Boston during the Woburn crisis. I saw the birth defects. I saw the cancer deaths. I saw what was happening in Woburn, and I hate to think we're going to get another Woburn in Berkshire County. So I think that rail, in one respect, makes a lot better sense to me from just a health and safety perspective because it would eliminate the aerosolization of PCBs going down these streets. I love that you said that we have the option to think about what small roads we would use, but the state highways are sort of out of the question. That's been a decree that's been established. I would challenge the EPA to think about this. Spend 20 minutes on Main Street Lee and watch one dump truck go by and hear the noise, because I know that your standards are 70 decibels is acceptable. Anything over that considers it hazardous noise. Well, I looked up just for ha-has to see what the decibels of a dump truck could be in the rail, and it's 87 to 107 decibels. Going again by the EPA website, I just used your own website. It said anything over 90 decibels, you have to shout to be heard. And I'm thinking these huge trucks are going to go down Main Street Lee. It's going to be deafening. So I know it's a state highway, but it's also a main street. And we've had some horrible accidents on that street just from vehicles that don't stop at crosswalks. So I just throw it out there as you're thinking about this plan and reading through this to maybe give a lot of thought about should those huge noisy dump trucks full of PCBs be traveling through the main streets of Lee? I really think, and I just want it on record, rail's the way to go if we've got to transport it.
So I just wanna.
Hold on, if you, so if you wanna speak, go ahead, stand up and say your name.
And I'll just finish real quick, Phoenix, that we were challenged after that great article in the Berkshire Eagle that our friends in League were asking Lenox people to challenge our boards of selectmen. So that's the reason I stood up, because I thought your idea was so good. And Phoenix and Jared and Julia over there are millennials. They're concerned young people. They're our future that are helping us move and activate some change.
Just. Thank you guys for what you're
If you
saying.
could just say your name and address for the
Sorry,
record, ma'am.
I'm Phoenix from Lenoxdale. Julia's and my kids, and I'm sure a lot of your grandkids here, go to actually the Montessori school right on the street. And also we spend, just as far as the aerosolization of the PCBs, when the trucks go by, our kids spend what, like 80% of their time outside, you know, so they're constantly, that's part of the reason I think we moved to this area is because of the beautiful environment and the fresh air, and you know, that's compromised in this situation. So we're being really mindful of where we're raising our kids, and sending them to school and everything, and trying to keep them healthy. And you know, we're considering, like, what if we have to move because of these things? Like, I'm sure everyone is thinking, is this a safe place to raise our families? So that's it.
He's like, oh, well.
Follow up on that, yeah, so thanks. My name's Julia. I'm from the town of Monterey, so I actually don't live in the rest of the river towns. But I am a public historian by trade, and when I moved here in 2017, just this issue immediately kind of resonated with me. And Dean, I've watched YouTube videos of you from the off, and I appreciate all the work that you all have been doing. I know it's hard work, but you know, it's also, this is a really difficult moment. I'm looking at that stack of diapers right now and thinking about the children who are going to be actually living in 15, 20 years down the line when you're talking about, you know, when these plans are being made for. It's not immediately consequential for a lot of the people in this room, but for our kids, it is. So I just wanted to say that, but I also have a question, and I didn't quite understand the format of this, so I understand you all might not be able to answer it, but I'm still going to ask it. So I was hoping that you could explain more about the process of the public comment period and how EPA determines what level of opposition to any given plan meets the criteria for a return to the drawing board from GE. In other words, as it relates to private citizens at least, is it a largely symbolic process or a substantively meaning process from which courses of action can be changed? And if the latter, what would you recommend that we as citizens do and focus our efforts on in order to kind of maximize the likelihood that by the end of this public comment period, we might actually be able to get you all to make a specific recommendation against the trucking crews for approved?
Doing my best, sir.
Okay, I got a short presentation here. Due to your time limits, I'm gonna skip right to the middle of it. Okay? By a ratio of 3 or 4 to 1.
May I ask who you are?
I'm sorry.
Name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is David Carrington from
Okay, thank you.
the. By a ratio of 3 or 4 to 1, when compared to trucks, the railroad is the least expensive, most efficient way to move heavy loads long distance. It's the most environmentally friendly with the smallest carbon footprint. The railroad takes the place of 13 years of thousands of truck trips through our towns and over our local roads, thereby reducing the chances of accident and injury to persons and property. Traffic accidents are the leading cause of death to people under 21 in Massachusetts, and the railroad is the most responsible way to transport this material while protecting the health and safety of our people. In addition to protecting the health and safety of our people, we want a good outcome for the town of Lee.
There is nothing good about a dam in the proposed location for the town of Lee. A mountain of muck and acres of plastic on top of what the U.S. Geological Survey calls the Woods Pond Aquifer, a water source of as much as 2 billion gallons a day in an area well used throughout the recreation. When people and companies around the world are buying up water rights due to uncertain supplies and climate change, GE would put a dump right on top of ours, and there it is, right there. Leaving us with years and years of testing, monitoring, maintenance, and would eventually still have to be dealt with by someone anyway. The whole thing devalues our town. On the other hand, the railroad bypasses local traffic, operating in a way most protective of our environment, our people, and the rail can take this material to a licensed landfill, over and done with. The outcome, the best outcome for the people, that's the best outcome for our people and our town. That's what we deserve, is to have a good outcome.
Claire Leahy, I live in Lee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing this, and I'd like to just give you a few pointers that I think are important. The real choice was only really feasible when they were going to ship it all out of state. Once we started looking at all these little sidings that were going to be made to have rail bring in materials into the UDF, it became cost prohibitive for GE. If they just put it all on rail and took it out of the state, it seems like we're doing the cart before the horse here. Dean has said that there's going to be a dump, but the EPA has not reviewed, or analyzed the plans that have been put forth by GE. We haven't heard yet for sure that there is going to be a dump. We're hoping that all our comments and those of some of the engineers are going to be considered by EPA. And to be talking about truck routes or rail when we don't even know yet whether there's going to be a dump, it just doesn't seem to make any sense right now. We need to know for sure that we're going to have a dump. Otherwise, it'll certainly make sense to just ship it all out on rail. Like, as GE considered, I mean, I know EPA doesn't know what kind of analysis GE really does. They come out with their proposal, but I would think that if they did a cost benefit analysis, they'd see that the cost of some sidings, maybe even 5 or 6 or 10, are less than building that dump. The cost of building that dump, and the fact that they're just still considering that after all the constraints that we've seen, and we've had the experts talk about the fact that it just isn't going to work. And the hydraulic pumping has not been proven. It was in the final decision in 2020. It was the EPA Appeals Board approved of GE's plea to have it and not have it all shipped out of state, by saying they were going to just put the lesser PCBs in the UDF and also do this hydraulic pumping. Those were the two. I can recall when they had that court hearing with the Environmental Appeals Board, that the judges there said, well, don't you think, to the EPA, they said this to EPA, the attorneys there for EPA, don't you think that it makes a real difference, that it would be a safer fix by having these two things? hydraulic pumping and the lesser PCBs going into the dump. It hasn't been proven that the hydraulic is going to work. They haven't shown that they have the place to dewater all this that's coming up there, and then they're supposed to separate the good from the bad PCBs up there on top of the hill. And then sort out all this water and get it back down cleaned up. It just doesn't make sense. And now they're talking about cutting and filling, which we never heard that before. Now, that's just recently that they realized from some of our engineers' reports that this is not going to be a level bottom. So now they're going to have to cut and fill. Isn't that going to add quite a bit to the expense of that dump? We need to hear from EPA. We need to hear from EPA that the dump is approved before we even begin thinking about trucking.
And it's no longer built, it's a superfund. It's being said in the last meeting.
You can get through public comment, so we'll do Gail and then ma'am, you have Gail after that.
Okay, Gail Cerisia, Lee. I agree with Claire about the hydraulic pumping. I'm very concerned about that. In one of the documents, EPA has waived the 50 parts per million that will be put in the dump. They've waived that. That means that this hydraulic pumping cannot be guaranteed to only put 50 parts per million or less up to the dump site, because there's no way to do that. Clearly, I mean, it isn't logical. And so they waived it. So now our dump is, and I'm totally confused by these two different permits, the Superfund permit and in Tosca. It confuses me. But what I'm trying to say is there's no guarantee that we're going to be at that level. And so we're not going to be getting low level. And when the EAB court hearing was being held, they can do something called averaging, which means that if you have a high concentration in one spot and a low concentration over here, you can mix it all up and bring it up to the dump, which means that you could put, I guess they're going to have 1.3 million cubic yards or whatever, but it just doesn't make sense that you could actually do what you're saying you can do. I agree with Claire about there's no dewatering site. Now I looked at the last article in the Eagle, and they show another area where they're going to be working or dewatering or whatever they're doing, stationing. That I don't even think that area has been studied. You know, I mean, I was up at that site. The water comes down that hill. It comes all behind Hell's Angels. When you're walking, when you're driving along, there's a valley there. It sits in like a lower area. The water sits there for certain times a year. I mean, the site is loaded with water. It's like a kidney that comes, you know, the water comes down and it goes through that sand and gravel. It's like a kidney. And they're going to put a hazardous waste dump on that site. HRI has already shown that some of the landfills aren't even acceptable. We've got PFAS, you know, coming down and hurting people. And it's just a crazy idea. And in all the reports from 2010 to right up into 2016 until the administration changed and all the EPA and all the officials were changed in favor of industry. And that's why we're in this situation. And and the public wasn't involved. And so all I'm saying is please, Board of Health, realize that there's going to be more than 50 parts per million in that dump. There's no way that they're going to be able to hydrologically do this. And besides that, I think the whole project is crazy. They're going to be dredging and riprapping and sending sediment down the stream. This is not a safe project. We have not seen what they're actually going to do. And I cannot find one hard copy about what's gonna happen in any of the reaches above Woods Pond. There's no hard copies. We're all expected to read a 1,000-page proposal for each section, 4,000, whatever. And it's very difficult to figure out what's going on because there's a lot of studies in there and there's a lot of, and there's plans and maps and I would like to see some hard copies, at least one hard copy in the libraries, so we could go look at a hard copy. I don't want to spend $500 for each copy. And so I really hope that the Board of Health realize there's going to be more than 50 parts per million in that dump. Please.
So you can try to keep our comments to 2 minutes once we give everyone a chance to speak, ma'am. You're next.
I'm Caroline Young from East Lee. And I'm going to get back to the subject of trucks for you guys. Because you guys didn't have a career like I did with a lot of truckers. I was a dispatcher. Truckers will go where it's easiest. You can plan out all of the routes. They will not go down Main Street and Lee. Trust me, they won't. They're going to go up Maple Street and East Street. They're going to come down Walker Street. They're going to come down Housatonic Street because it's easier. And unless there is a General Electric executive in every single one of those trucks, pay attention, Dean. They're gonna go where they're gonna go. Yeah.
Sure. So my name is Jared Weber. I'm a resident of Lenox, and I think I want to address the Tri-Town Board of Health rather than the EPA in this comment. And specifically, Diane and John, I'd like to speak with you and welcome a conversation at another time. But I'm really interested in what James had to say. I believe your name is James, right?
I'm most saying yes.
Yes. This idea of uniting the Lenox, Lee, and Stockbridge town managers and select board, specifically around this issue of assessing a truck route, which I think is kind of ludicrous that we're suggesting using the GE payoff money to fund this assessment ourselves.
Agreed.
Well, Dean, I'm not sure why you would suggest that and not, as the regulatory body, why you would not demand that GE take that undertaking as part of this remediation plan, but maybe you can inform me on that on another time, which I also welcome. But Diane and John, as a Lenox resident, new Lenox resident, I've invested my income, I'm a taxpayer here. I really do implore you to make any effort to impact our Lenox town manager, our Lenox select board, to please get them together with the Lee town manager, the Lee select board, and the Stockbridge town manager and the Stockbridge select board to assess this specific issue, but also to create a larger working group around this whole project. So that's it. As a Lenox resident, Diane and John, please, I really would like to speak with you about this and see if we can get the group together.
Second.
Thank you. Mark Manoli from Sheffield, also a local business owner. Many of us feel our input has never mattered in this proceeding. To the Tri-Town Board of Health, thank you for asking the questions and the concern. It's appreciated. So there's this idea I have that if I were to go down to the river, to the Housatonic right now and disrupt the ecology, at a certain point, I'd be breaking the law. I know farmers that have gotten entangled legally for moving a few rocks for a dead tree in Sheffield. All I've heard around here and seen is for decades, protect the wetlands. I mean, it's all we hear about. It's illegal, nightmare. This project, this destruction of the river, the wetlands of the floodplain from Pittsfield to Great Barrington is massive. It's massive. It's like trying to swat a fly with a wrecking ball. It's unbelievable. These wetlands have been protected for a reason, right? They clean the water. That's what they do. I hope you protect them. That's what they do. This is counterintuitive. I'll spare you my other speech for now on the unconstitutionality of this whole project. That we, the people, have not had a vote on the matter. That this whole project is built on a house of cards. That a small 5-member appointed group cannot make these wide sweeping agreements for us. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I object to this entire project. And many others feel the same way, and that we want to vote.
Is there any, for those that are on Zoom, if you click on your reaction at the bottom, you should see a button that says raise hand. So we'll kind of turn it over to Zoom, see if there's anyone on Zoom that would like to participate in public comment. If you can just raise your hand and we'll do our best to be fair on who we pick first. Give a couple minutes, see if they can navigate that, if there are any public comments.
New technology, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to like kind of clean up the Zoom part and then go back. All right, so if we're waiting for a raised hand, we'll go back to someone who hasn't spoken. We're gonna try to wrap up the speak time shortly. Was there someone that hasn't spoken yet that wants to speak?
I can use somebody's time for
Well,
one.
which is, ma'am, if you could say your name.
It's just confusing to me from the beginning as to what the exit plan is. Kind of like doing everything backwards. Why not do the community impact study ahead of time? You know, we saw the Berkshires as health and wellness. We had all these health resorts and all this stuff going on, culture and this and that. And it's just, it's gonna be a big lie. We have a dirty little secret. We're gonna have big old toxic waste dump.
Yes.
And if there's nothing in that big old 4,000 page document that says the citizens have to put up with this shit. So, you know, my take is, I think there's gonna be a really big negative publicity campaign from the citizens, really, because what have we got left? You didn't, you know, you didn't give us a choice up front. And you certainly can't control what we do on the back end. So who knows, you know? And from a health standpoint, none of it makes sense. I mean, we're all, you know, there's already plenty of cancer in Berkshire County. There's toxic waste dumps or schools on toxic waste dumps all over the country. This is not a local issue. I didn't see Michael Reagan's name on the copy list from the report that just came out with the transportation study. Is the regional EPA even communicate with Michael Reagan? Does he know what's going on here? 40 years ago, there was an upheaval in Warren County, North Carolina. They were digging PCBs out of the ground and putting them in a dump then. You know, why have we found a better solution? This is 40-year anniversary of the environmental justice movement. What makes you think there isn't going to be another one?
So you may have to ask them on mute, Zach, Susan.
Top to bottom.
Well, I think Susan has her hand up. Oh, you got a couple up there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Janice, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the Tri-Town Select Board for everything they're doing to try to protect everybody. I've been against this right from the beginning. It's going to be trouble, this dump. It's going to leak. It's going to leak into our water. It's wrecking the most beautiful mountain we have, October Mountain. I grew up there. I love that mountain. I love Lee. And it's going to be so hard to sell real estate with all these trucks going through town, and they're going to say, what's going on? Of course, I tell them anyway, we have a PCB dump. Lee is supposed to be the gateway to the Berkshires. It's going to be a gateway to the PCB dump. And I think the EPA needs to look into this, and they should ship everything out by rail, or else do other ways to clean up this river, which there is. And we shouldn't be using our $25 million to hire all these people to look after what's going on. Because there's going to be a bunch of lawsuits down the road, believe me. People are going to lose values of their property. They're gonna be getting sick. You know, I'm gonna be dead in a few years probably, so it isn't gonna bother me, but I'm fighting for the people of Lee. I'm fighting for the people of this Berkshire County, and I'm fighting for the children, our future. They shouldn't have to deal with us down the road. And the EPA better step up to the plate and work with us and fight against GE, because they're the ones that put this here. And I believe Dean says you're gonna be able to eat fish out of here once it's cleaned up. I guarantee you, we're not gonna be able to eat fish out of this river. So I think, you know, something's gotta be done. It's gotta be done quick. And I don't know what else to do. If I had millions of dollars, I'd be cleaning this up myself, but I don't. And we never had a vote on this. You know, this is where we grew up. This is where we live. This is where we raised our families, and it needs to stop. And that's all I can say right now, because it really upsets me. But I do want to thank the Board of Health for everything they're trying to do to work with us and help us. Thank you.
Susan?
Hi, Susan Stone here from Lee. I really appreciate this meeting. I've gotten a lot of insight, Mr. Luce. I really appreciated the information you gave on those sites. I agree with most everything. David, thank you for your information, and the unconstitutionality of this whole process of how we got here is just an affront. And I do not think we should be, the GE should be responsible for figuring or doing more to find out if perhaps the train option is not the better, safest, and cleanest way to do this. Thank you all for doing this.
We can take one or two more comments, and we're gonna try to wrap up public comment periods. We still have a couple other things of work that we need to do.
Yeah, just one thing, we need to write letters to our politicians.
Yes.
It needs to happen.
I'll just wanted to add to Diane and John, I do implore you to do that before your December meeting, because that means 30 days will have gone by. So I, as a person from Lenox, please take care of this before the 30 days goes by. At least like only 60 days left.
Agreed.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all for your comments. And I think everybody's had a chance to speak, who would wish to speak, and some people have spoken twice, and the board very much appreciates your input, and we're very empathetic with all of your points. So I'm going to close the public comment period at this point. Thank you about that. I'd like to ask the board, I did skip the agenda item of approving the 9/11/23 minutes, so I'd like to have a motion to approve those minutes. Can I have that motion, please? Okay, John, you and Diane, are you seconding that? Thank you. All in favor, please, a roll call vote?
Dr. Westphizer, Elvia, Diana, John, Elias, Kenny, no. Maybe that's worth doing. I don't have any updates. I think, departmental updates, we're crafting a budget, and I'll present that at the December meeting.
And I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the EPA Region 1 team for coming very much. And again, I want to say that we really wish to try to bring this to a closure that leaves a legacy behind that everybody can be proud of. And thank you for your help so far. So I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the meeting. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. All right, so